And whenever our emotions are hypervigilant or hyper aroused during trauma and the protective mechanisms are in gear, think about your emotional center and your rational center as two switches. They both can't fully be turned on at the same time. So while I'm melting down here in this
Mhm.
hypervigilant emotion, guess where my prefrontal cortex is? It's offline. So someone says, well, then how do you break the cycle? Let's go back to the beginning. Somebody did something, I asked questions, and I formulated a meaning, a narrative, became a fixed belief in a behavior. Yeah. So now what we
Yeah.
want to do is when someone does something, I still want to ask questions. I want to ask a different set of questions because then I'm going to get a different story and I'm going to create a different belief system.
Hey guys, welcome back. I'm so excited about today's episode. We have Dr. Russ Irwin back in the house. He is publishing and releasing a book called Breaking the Cycles of Trauma. This is a conversation you do not want to miss. We're going to be talking about the layers of trauma. How does trauma actually happen? What does it actually look like lived out? And how do we break the cycle? How do we interrupt those familiar patterns? This is a perfect timing coming off last week's episode where I shared my own personal testimony of healing and restoration. Today, Dr. Russ is sharing his story. He is an amazing man. He's a wealth of wisdom. Not only does he have a PhD in human behavior and psychology, but he has traveled the world as a consultant, as a therapist to some of the best elite high performers. I'm really excited to have him on the show and to dive into this conversation. It's practical, it's tactical, and it's high level at the same time. So it gives you greater understanding about what's going on, right? And it gives you hope for a way forward. Let's jump in. All right, all right. Here we are. Russ is back. Dr. Russ is back in the house. Welcome back. I know. It's like I see
Thank
you
you.
there in
Glad to be
Burlington.
here.
This goes
Always an
back to
honor
our
to
days when
hang
I
with
was
you.
living in Canada. So we actually met in Arizona, I think it was back in the day, right?
Yes, we did. You had a conference. And you threw me off with, I thought, she's so prophetic. You looked at me, you said, Hamilton. I'm like, wow, how did you know? Then I realized I had a McMaster University shirt on from Hamilton, but it didn't clue in at that moment. I thought, gosh, this
Well, I
lady
am
across the
prophetic, but
lobby
yes,
here is
that
so
was funny.
prophetic
That
to know
was
that I'm from the
hilarious.
Hamilton area.
Okay, so I'm so glad we're doing this. We had you on the show a while ago where
Yeah.
you shared your testimony. It was super powerful. For those of you who haven't listened to that, I highly encourage you to go back. I'm sure we'll dig into that today. But last week we did a podcast on just how to deal with betrayal, loss, how the wounds of our past will keep running us and ruling us until we finally decide to break the cycle, get healing, work through that. Um, it's my belief it's impossible to do that without Jesus fully, but I'm curious your take on that. And so I just thought this is such a perfect time to do this
Mhm.
conversation. So we're going to be talking about trauma. Russ has a book coming out at the end of July, the beginning of August. So we're going to talk about that. So you guys will definitely want to listen in to our conversation today as we unpack kind of the stages of trauma, even when you're not aware that maybe you've gone through something, or when you do go through something traumatic. Like, what are the stages of that healing process? And
Mhm.
if you see those repetitive cycles coming up, how do you actually break free of that? So
Yeah.
I think we'll just start that. First of all, why don't you give us a little bit of your backstory? I know you
Yeah.
told us that before, but tell us a little bit about yourself and then your backstory.
Sure. No, thank you. I'm a very, very committed believer. I became a believer when I was just turning 19. Actually grew up in a very rough area of the city in the projects. My father,
Mm-hmm.
although turned out to be an amazing man and turned out to be my best friend for about 10 years before he passed away. But he was born in England. My mother was born in England. My father's father, who was his hero, left the
Mm-hmm.
family when my father was 9 years of age, just ran out, left with another lady. And it was devastating to my dad at age of 9 and devastating to his mom. His mom never really knew how to handle and process that because she deeply loved her husband. So she became very, very abusive and violent, became an alcoholic. My father left school at 9 years
Mm-hmm.
of age. And this is all during the London Blitzkrieg in World War II when London's being bombed. So my dad had to quit school at 9 years of age and get a job and provide for the family. Long story short is there wasn't really the vast array of counselors and therapists and different things, pastors that there is today. So, it was really this kind of a culture is big boys don't cry. You're the man of the house now. I know you're 9, but you got a job and you provide. And so a lot of the issues that
Hmm.
were formulated in him at a young age, he never had the
Yes.
opportunity to deal with that. And so he just buried it, which is what oftentimes we were taught to do years ago.
Come on.
In burying that, whatever we can't acknowledge and we can't see, we can't recover from. So he didn't have that ability to really acknowledge, nor did he really want to see or know how to see what was going on. And so there was that inability to recover from those
Hmm.
traumatic events. Henceforth, and we could look at this through the generational
Hmm.
bloodline lenses. My father grew up to become like his mother. He became very abusive and alcoholic. My brother, abusive, alcoholic. It just continued down the family chain. But it was interesting, but my dad's world fell apart when he was 9 and his mom started drinking.
Hmm.
My world fell apart when I was 9 when my dad started drinking and beating me. And he wasn't an evil guy. And in fact, when I confronted him
Yeah.
years later about his behavior in our relationship, he broke down
Yeah.
crying, said, I
Yeah.
had no idea I'd ever done any of that. He was just drunk all the time. And, so that really happened. What that did in me is, I think, a very kind, shy young kid is I recognized that the only way you're going to make it in the
Hmm.
world is to survive. So
Yeah.
my goal became to grow up and kill my dad. And I would tell him that that was my inevitable goal in life,
Hmm.
and then I would stand sometimes between him and my mom to protect my mom. My mom would run
Yeah.
upstairs, and part of me wished, I'm 9 years of age. I wish you were here to protect me, but I'd rather you be up there and I'll protect you. So it was a very abusive environment that developed a lot of anger and a lot of rage in me, and I was thrown out of high school in grade 11, my third year, just because of the violence and the rage that was really consuming me. I was hardly ever
Yeah.
in school. The Canadian credit system, you generally get about 8 credits per year. So by the end of grade 11, third year, I should have had 24
Hmm.
credits. I think I had three and a half. I wasn't there. I was just really in bad shape. And then so I got to this point where I got thrown out of school. The irony is that here I am, a doctor, but I still don't have a high school diploma. So I was never allowed to finish school because no school in the city would allow me to come back because I was too violent and too crazy. And I remember, of course, that fell into a life of gangs and drugs, and really was all about belonging and survival. And anyway, one Saturday morning, I had just come off a really rough Friday night, and I sat with my mom and dad in the kitchen and told them what was going on in my life. My dad's thought was, well, you're such a loser anyway. Like, who cares? Basically, my mom's like, well, why don't you call this fella? He's a paramedic supervisor. He knows medical stuff. Maybe they can get you in a rehab program or straighten your life out. So I called this guy up,
Yeah.
and you have to understand that I had no concept of a God or Jesus. Really didn't know what that was. So I called him up, explained in about 5 minutes my situation. And he said, well, why don't you come over and see me tomorrow? He said, we can talk. I'll stay home from church. And I said, what? Church? He said, yeah. And so I hung up the phone and I said to my mom, he's going to stay home from church tomorrow. What's going on here? She said, oh, he's a religious freak. Don't listen to any of that stuff. Just go over and see him, and maybe he can help you out with your behavior and your craziness. So I go over there, knock at the door. He said, come on. And I said, hold on a moment. I said, listen, you mentioned something about church
Yeah.
yesterday. He said, yeah. I said, I don't want to hear anything about it. And I was effing this and effing that,
Hmm.
and you're effing God and effing Jesus. And I threatened him. And look, I'm bigger than you. If you start talking to me about this Jesus stuff,
Hmm.
I'm going to hurt you. I'll hurt you right in your own house. And I was
Hmm.
just kind of crazy. No, no, I understand. No, fully, no mention of that. Come on in. So we're walking down the stairs. And I said, look, I need to let you know, man, like, I'm not kidding. I don't want anything to do with religion, God, or anything like that. Again, if you mention anything, I'm out of here. But I said, I'm going to hurt you. He said, okay, I understand. So here, sit on the couch. So I sat beside him on the couch, and he went to say something. I said, look, are we clear the game plan here? There's no God. He said, I fully understand, Russ. Then he looked at me and he said, so it's been 40 years. That still moves me
Yeah.
emotionally. He looked at me and he said, Russ, your problem's not physical, it's spiritual. God loves you and wants to be a father to you. And I fell off his couch, like literally, like somebody pushed me off the couch. I laid on the floor of this guy's house in a fetal position for about 45 minutes, and I bawled like a baby. And I got up, he was just sitting there on the couch.
Hmm.
And I looked at him and he was smiling. I said, what the hell just happened to me? He
Yeah.
said, how do you feel? I said, I feel like I've taken 1,000 showers with my exact words. I got up off that floor And Christine, I never fought again. I'm not sure I swore again. Drugs were over, alcohol was over. I went 2 nights later to the gang to tell them all about Jesus and what Jesus had done in my
Mm-hmm.
life. And, you know, some of these situations, you don't kind of get
Yeah,
out of
they're
them, they
like,
don't
stop
let you
talking about
leave.
Jesus.
They couldn't wait for me to get out. This guy's lost his mind, man. We don't want you around here anymore. And so I lost every friend that I had, I knew. Spent the next 2 years. He took me to church. I went into church that night, you know, into kind of a charismatic service. I had work boots on, a lumber jacket, hair probably longer than yours, with a big safety pin in my ear. And you could see all the fathers at the church grabbing their daughters, like, who's this guy that just came in here? And I went to church with him every Sunday. And for the next 2 years, because I had no friends, I spent pretty well almost every night at his house. And he just discipled me and mentored me in the love of God. And it was really interesting. About 2 weeks after I had become a believer, he said, you know, you need to read the Bible, Russ. I said, okay, why is that? He said, well, you need to get the word in you so then the Holy Spirit can recall it at any point in time. I said, okay. So I went to the Christian
Yeah,
bookstore, went to the music section, thought I should probably listen to some Christian stuff now. There was two cassettes in the
that's
entire
funny.
music section. One was a guy, Larry Norman, the other one was Pat Boone singing hymns. So I bought the Pat Boone cassette singing hymns, wore that out in about 3 weeks till it finally
Wow.
broke on me.
You
But I bought a
immersed
Bible
yourself
and I
in
read
it.
it cover to cover in
Yeah,
2.5 weeks.
yeah.
Just like I got to know this stuff, like what has happened to me, you know. And the interesting thing is this, and I love to
Mm-hmm.
share this with people. Everything in my
Mm-hmm.
life
I'm so
continually
glad we're
changed
going to go
literally
there because
overnight,
that's exactly what I
except my
want to
trauma
talk
healing.
about.
That was
Yeah.
years. That was a process. Yeah, that did not happen overnight. That was a process. It was a process of layers being healed. And I had to understand the healing of trauma and the layers of trauma long before I went to get an education in it,
Mm-hmm.
because it was so easy for me to go through, let's call it,
Yes.
say, a breakthrough moment. Only 6 months later, a trigger to happen. It's like, whoa. And then
Yeah.
I'm back again.
Yeah.
And now I'm filled with shame, wondering maybe I was never changed.
Yeah.
Maybe nothing ever happened. So I
Mm-hmm.
had to understand the layering framework for trauma. But it took a long time. It took a tremendous amount of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of energy, and a lot of support from professionals, from family, from believers. You know, but I can't. I often say to people with trauma when they want this instantaneous moment, I said, "Look, you didn't get into this overnight. You're probably not going to get out
Sometimes
overnight."
he does.
And I
Yeah.
said, you know, if God just zaps you, and He can, and sometimes He does. I've seen that happen. But I said, you know, we often don't have as much of appreciation for what we rent as we do with what we own. And I said, you know, when you've sweated
Mm.
out and you've poured your energy, effort, time, and blood into, wow, now I bought this and I own this. And I said, it's not
Mhm.
that there's effort into healing, but when healing takes time and you're patiently and persistently committing to the process of God,
It
it
makes me
feels a
think
little bit
about,
different a
when
few
we
years
pray
later than if you
for
just got a snap thing.
God, like fix my financial situation, or we're praying for a financial miracle and like, God, I need that breakthrough. And then sometimes he does. Sometimes there's that check in the mail. Sometimes there's that, that opening, but we're not ready for what he's about to receive. And so on one hand, it's like, okay, I received salvation. I
Yeah,
have an inheritance now. The fullness of heaven is available to me now. But I still have to walk it out. I have to learn to I have to develop the character that can sustain that. It's what I'm
yeah,
thinking about as you're talking, because I think about every great thing that God has
yeah,
given me that I didn't have to sustain in my own strength. I needed to develop the character over time for that and walk it out. But okay, I
yeah,
love that because there's this like I don't want to say tension, but when you were talking about you have one encounter with Jesus, you fall to the floor, like grace washes over you. It's like you're a new man. And yes, at the same time, the trauma's still not gone, right? There's going to be triggers later. And I just wanted to tap on that because, man, I've had
yeah.
so many amazing encounters with Jesus myself. And sometimes it's like, shoo, the thing's gone, you know? And sometimes it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Can you walk us through that?
Mhm.
Like you said, trauma is a process. Obviously, it is a process. And you talked about the
Yeah.
layering framework. I don't know if it's appropriate. Do we talk about that now, or do we talk about the stages of trauma? Like, obviously, sometimes something happens. Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
Well, they're all somewhat the same. I'll say this before I get to layers. It was a number of years ago, and I was really asking the Lord for healing in a particular area in this
Mm,
breakthrough.
yeah.
And rather than the Lord answering me, he asked me a question. So here I am, oh God,
Yeah.
and he's just probably smiling away and waiting to like, already you done? Can I speak now? And he asked me a question. He said, and my son was
Hmm.
very young at the time. And he said, would you give dynamite to your
Yeah.
son?
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, what do you mean? What kind of a dumb question is
Mm,
that? Like, I'm really honest with God. Well, no.
yeah.
Would you give
Exactly.
dynamite to your son? I said, no. Well, why wouldn't you? I said, because he couldn't handle it. He'd blow himself up. And I said, well, he said, well, what I want you to understand, Russ, is that many of the things that you desire, I actually desire to give them to you. But what I desire more is not the release of the gift, but the ability to prepare something
Mhm.
deep in your heart that you'll steward well the gift when I
Yeah.
give it to you and it won't blow up in your hands. And that was an incredible lesson, that, yes, the scripture
Yeah.
says he gives us the
Yeah.
desires of our heart and he desires to give us things. He's a prosperous, faithful, kind, good God. But what he longs for more than giving us the gift is putting within us that foundational of trustworthiness. So when he gives the gift, I can be trusted with that gift. And how often do we see that, even in ministry, we see people with a tremendous
Oh
gift,
gosh.
but not the character development of the trustworthiness. I mean, I've been there many times
Totally.
myself, and God says, hey, we got to go back to the drawing board here. So,
Yeah.
my prayer
Yeah.
now is moved a little bit from God, I want anointing, as to God, now I want wisdom, so that I
Yeah.
will
So good.
steward well
Well,
what you
you
give
knew
me and
me
I'll
back in
represent
the
you
day when
well.
I was going through
You
these
know,
tumultuous relationship cycle. And I was praying, God, like, why can't I have this figured out? Like, what is going on? I've been divorced. Like, I just felt like such a hot mess relationally. Like, why could I not figure this out? Like, I was smart, I was intelligent, I was building businesses. Like,
yeah,
I was athletic, I thought I was good looking, I thought I had a lot to offer the world. And then I'm just like, I cannot get this area dialed in. And I kept praying for the right person and coming efforting. And you remember me in that moment. And I just had to go through that season of just,
yeah,
learning to love learning to receive love from the Father, learning to be the beloved, learning to who I was, learning to recognize my value and my worth in God's eyes, not in a man's eyes, before I could ever sustain a relationship. Man, he could have dropped the most perfect man and I would have
hmm
messed it up. I would have sabotaged it because I didn't, I had such a dysfunctional view of
yeah,
love. I was like, I remember after going through that, like nobody ever taught me, and I'm sure with you too, how to really receive love, how to be a beloved, how to like respect. What's
yeah,
that honor? Like, forget about that. What is honor? Like, it was just so foreign. Um, so crazy.
yeah. Well, think about who you've become now and who you
Yeah.
are because God refused to deliver you from something, but he took you through it. So if
Oh,
he
for sure.
delivered you from the immediacy of the answer of prayer, you may not be who you are right now. But it's interesting when you talked about love and respect and honor. And I have found it's really interesting um, that many of us, even within the Christian church, we say and we believe that God loves
Mm-hmm.
us. But the real
Love.
question is not whether he loves us, is why do we believe that? And so what I mean by that is this, is that God is love and his nature is love. And he can't go against his nature, so he has to love.
He
But
has
that
to.
sows within my subconscious,
Mm-hmm.
well, he loves me because he's obligated. He loves me. Well, I guess he has to love me. But there's a big
Yeah.
difference between him loving me because he's obligated and loving me because I'm lovable. And so I think the revelation that God releases in this, one of the things that often goes out the door, with trauma is our worth, our value, and our identity. And what becoming lovable is, and really understanding I'm actually that valuable. So here's the interesting thing is that God did not send Jesus to die for Jesus in us. He sent Jesus to die
Mm-hmm.
just for us, so that as a result of that death, he could be in us. So
Yeah.
God did not
Yeah.
die for
Um,
Jesus in me.
yeah.
He just died for me as a hot mess. He died for me as a wreck. The result of him dying for this wreck that he loves so much is he now gets to live in this wreck and change this wreck.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't die for Christ in me. He didn't die for an end result. He
Mm-hmm.
died because he just loved me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I never changed, he still would have sent Christ. He still would have died for me. So that changes the whole game now, that he doesn't love me because he has to, although that's his nature. He actually loves because he wanted to. People say, well, Christ had to come, God had to send him because the sacrificial system wasn't working anymore. I get all that theologically and theoretically.
Yes.
But what we often miss, which is the beauty of the moment, is the scandalous love, is that
Hmm.
God didn't really as much have to send Christ. He actually wanted to. Christ didn't have to die because he could have
Yeah.
called on 10,000 angels right there in Gethsemane. But he said, you know what? I'm not going to go with what I want. I'm
Yeah.
going to go with what you want. And so it really is the greatest love story. It's not a story of obligation, it's a story of pure love. And when
Yeah.
that arrests us at the core of our being, that shifts identity, that shifts value, that shifts worth. And all of a sudden, the residual impact of trauma starts to fade now when my value and worth start to fall into intact and start to align themselves with heaven's plan and heaven's intention. Up until that moment, if I'm struggling with
Oh,
obligation,
okay.
obligatory love is going to do nothing for my worth and value. In fact, if anything, it's going to increase my fear. Because if you love me because you have to, and after all, I'm a wreck and I'm
When
a
you can
mess,
find out who I really
I'm
am.
always wondering, when is the
Yeah.
mic going to drop and you going to leave now? And there's a lot of believers that we all
Mhm.
recognize we have measures of imposter syndrome. Welcome to the human, condition here. And sometimes we're trying to win the one we've won because we're living for him and with him out of obligatory love. So we're always wondering when he's going to go. And if our trauma is in rejection and betrayal and people leaving us, then we put that
Yeah.
as a head on the
Oh,
shoulders of the Father now, and we just wait for him to leave. And eventually, what we can do in extreme cases, well, if you're going in anyway, I'm going to save myself the pain. Now I
yeah.
move towards, I graduate to self
Oh, do I know
sabotage
that
because
pattern?
I'm going to hurt you
I'll
before
leave
you go and
first.
hurt me.
I'll leave first. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
true. It's so good.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
as you were talking, and I have experienced that love, and I remember, that when you talk about this great love affair, I mean, I so know that love, and it's like it's this love that like it really is. It's just it's
Yeah.
so overwhelming, and until you experience it, there's just no words. There's just no words for it, and yet we push it away. And I know I see this in the
Yeah.
people that I'm coaching, the men and women that
Yeah.
I'm coaching. And I saw this in my own life, whether it's conscious or unconscious, but it's like we want intimacy so much, but we're terrified of it. It's like it's like there's this inability to actually receive the love, to, you know what I mean? Like, it's like I want intimacy, but I keep pushing it away. So
Yeah.
there's just like this dance. Can you talk about that? Like, what is so terrifying about receiving love? And I'm just thinking
Yeah.
specifically of, real conversation I've been having with people lately in the coaching world, et cetera, where it's like, I want this intimacy with my wife. I want her to want me. I want her to love me. I want, right? Which is a
Yeah.
God given desire. And yet there's like an inability to go and be loved, like to receive the love. So this like, I want it, but I don't.
So, yeah. No, that's a great idea and really a great question to formulate from
Mm,
that. There's a big difference between what I want and what I believe I deserve. And your subconscious will not allow you to have what you don't believe you deserve. And so I might
mm-hmm.
want something, but if I don't believe I deserve it, my subconscious will fight me on that. My reticular activating system, my threat detection center, is always going to be on guard for the shoe to drop, the mic to fall, whatever, the betrayal to happen. And so, because I'm wired for love, I'm wired for belonging, and there is a chasm within the heart of every man for God that only God can fill. So, I want this, but I've got a pattern belief system. I have been programmed in a certain way to believe, but I don't deserve that. So, even if I get it, I'm going to live with the fear of how long am I going to have it. So
Right.
now I have to decide, is it even really worth having temporarily, or is it better to not have it at all? And so, I also say this to people. I get a lot of people that will call me and say something like this, whether it's relationships, business, or whatever. I think one of the buzzwords these days is stuck,
Yeah.
lost, or plateaued. So people are always calling, I'm stuck. I need to get unstuck. I've hit a plateau. I've hit that upper limit syndrome, Russ, that ceiling over me, or, I'm lost right now. What do I do? And I firmly believe this is that
Mm-hmm.
people don't get stuck because they lack potential. They get stuck because they're running patterns. And so we're conditioned right from that first no, that first rejection, that first beating, whatever, is our brain tries to process at an early developmental stage This person hitting me says they love me. This person hitting me is an authority figure in my life that's supposed to protect me. So it's like the confusion. I don't understand. You say you love me, then you hit me. You're going to protect me, and then you hurt me. And so it creates this internal contradiction
Yes.
that what happens is I create a neuroassociation that pain equals love. And so I really want love. So I'll actually try to find it in a painful place now or with a painful person. And I hate what they do to me, but I have a neuroassociative pattern that believes that those things are synonymous now. So I allow myself to experience things that create this internal conflict that hurts me and I cry and I don't want it,
Hmm.
but I believe
Hmm.
I deserve it and it's all I know. And isn't that after all that? And so I stay, and so these patterns, there are five, what I would call levers or five levels of pattern creation. And your patterns, we've heard many self-help and many, really great professional development people have talked about this over the years, probably going back to Jim Rohn, is you're either going to have limiting beliefs or you're going to have limitless belief. You're either going to have disempowering beliefs or empowering beliefs, good ones or bad ones or aspirational ones. But the key is what causes them. And so there are basically five
Hmm.
stages that are involved in creation of a pattern and a belief. The first one is our thoughts. And so when someone says something, does something to me, the first interaction is going to be my mind. I'm automatically trying to process what they said. And what my mind is
Hmm.
actually asking, is this true or not? And so I'm processing for a conclusion
Yes.
now. But the
No.
interesting thing about the mind is, as powerful as our thoughts don't do very well on their own. Your thoughts are always looking for an alignment. They're looking for somebody to come and work with them, to come alongside them. So it goes to the emotional center of the brain and says, I kind of got
Hmm.
this thought right now based upon what somebody said to me. Can you kind of help me out right now? So it calls for an ally. So the emotions come now and connect with the thought center of the brain. And whenever you have a strong thought and a strong emotion concerning something, your brain actually takes a neurochemical snapshot of
Yes.
that and takes that
So good.
snapshot,
Yeah,
puts
because
it
I
into what's
often
called
say
the
like we
refractory
repeat
place
what
of
our
your
body
brain, which is the
remembers. And I
place of
don't know. I
meaning.
think
So now I got a
you
strong thought, I got a
talk more,
strong
go ahead.
emotion of what was said to me. Now I got to create a conclusion. What meaneth this? And the meaning area of the brain says, well, this is what it means. So when I pair a thought and emotion
Hmm.
with an interpretation or a meaning, guess what that's going to lead to? A conclusive decision now.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Is healed. Okay, pause. Hold on. So what you're saying is, as long as if I can recount the history or the experience, and now I have a neutral response in my nervous system. That's a signal that now we have like completely healed that. But if there's still a trigger or a response, then there's still another layer of healing that needs to happen. Yeah. 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 Yes. Invitation into alignment. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm so glad you're saying this.
And I said, yes and no.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you mean? I said, I believe I'm healed 100% of everything I'm aware of. But
Right.
I don't know if there's anything
Yeah.
latent that God is holding off right now because of his love and he knows I'm not ready to deal with that. But there's going to come a time in the near future he's going to say, it's time to move on, Russ, and you're ready. I said, so he's going to send a trigger. It's going to light me up like a Christmas tree. I'm going to be like,
Yeah,
what are you doing? I thought
judgment,
I was healed. And the
condemnation.
enemy will come in and say, shame, entry point, access. And God will say, no, love invitation, Russ. And so I now can combat the enemy's legal access towards shame and actually see, no, this is an invitation for a greater degree of healing. So I said,
Mhm.
I'm healed of what I know, but I don't know of what I don't know. And I think that that's the grace of God that, sometimes people have said, I just wish he would have done a
Yeah.
number on me and healed everything instantaneously. I said, you might blow up if he did that. I said, you might not be ready for that. So I said, in his grace, I hate to use the word stall because we think, well, delay is bad. And if God stalls and delays, then he doesn't really love. So why would he delay and keep me in this? Well, no, he is stalling because he's
Mhm.
preparing us to be ready for something.
Mhm.
Because when God does a
So
job, he does it
good.
once and for all, you know? And not only that, but trauma is it's within the nervous system, but it's not stored in a horizontal plane within our nervous system. It's stored vertically within the brain. And what I mean by that is if you often see people, and this is a classic defense mechanism of the brain, is that if you watch
Mhm.
people describe their trauma, if they have CPTSD, so the accumulation of several events over time, where PTSD is the trauma
Mhm.
that's induced from one
Mhm.
event,
Mhm.
like a father died, a wife died, I went through a divorce, I'm traumatized. That's an event.
So complex
CPTSD is
meaning all things
complex, meaning
happen
there's
at
several
once
events.
or in a
So
tight
here's what
period
this
of
person
time
does.
or
Watch
just
my hand.
over a life.
Over time, over time. So when I was 5, this happened. I was 14, this happened. When I was 30,
Mhm.
this happened. So there's the cumulative effect that creates the complexity of the trauma, whereas PTSD is boom, one thing happened. So here's how people will often describe their trauma like this. Let's say, well, when I was 5, this happened. And then I was 15, I remember this happened. Oh my God, the divorce when I was 30. What are my hands doing? I'm describing my trauma on a horizontal axis. Why am I doing that? Because my brain thinks it's a defensive way of when I'm over here, if I'm 30, I'm not
Mhm.
thinking about something happened 25 years ago. So I get to keep that out of sight and out of mind because right now, when I was 30, this took place. So as I go through it horizontally, my brain thinks it's actually protecting me from the residual effects of that. The problem is trauma is not stored horizontally, it's stored vertically. And it's stored at a subcortical region of the brain where language
Thank God. I
oftentimes
was
can't
going to ask you
access,
that. I'm so
which is
glad
why
you
a
went
lot of
there.
traditional talk therapy doesn't work well with trauma.
Yeah. Mhm.
And this is where EMDR and neurobrain spotting and various modalities are really impactful because
Mhm.
they're able to go deep in the recesses and allow you to process there. But here's an example, and this really has to do a lot with traumatic or neural hijacking. Is so this person does something to me, and it's minor, but I lose my crap, man, and I freak out on them, and I just go nuts.
Mhm.
And someone looks at me and goes, "Whoa, dude! Like, what was that? Like, what were you thinking? Like that response doesn't really match what happened." Here's the thing, and this can be so freeing for people. I
Mhm.
wasn't
Stacking
responding
them.
to that event. I was responding from these events. And whenever our emotions are hypervigilant or hyper aroused during trauma and the protective mechanisms are in gear, think about your emotional center and your rational center as two switches. They both can't fully be turned on at the same time. So while I'm melting down here in this
Mhm.
hypervigilant emotion, guess where my prefrontal cortex is? It's offline. So now someone says, what were you thinking? I wasn't thinking. I was offline. I was in a full blown emotional, hyper aroused, reactive state. Now, what happens 2 or 3 hours later? When my emotions calm down, I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Why did I say or do that? All of a sudden now, I'm looking at that situation through rational lenses. Oh, why would I say that? That is so stupid. I'm processing rationally because it's back online and my emotions have calmed down. So, most people, it's called a neuro emotional hijacking, is when we're hypervigilant, when a trigger comes, is that we have this explosive reaction.
Mhm.
And it's not because we're bad people, is we've gone into protective survival mode. And the brain doesn't care about personal development and growth. It cares about safety and protection. That's it, and comfort. That's what you're wired for. And so now it's causing me to react to protect. And I can't stop myself as I'm screaming and say, whoop, hold on a
Mhm.
second. Okay, let's just logically look at this right now. I'm offline. And so what happens is when I experience neuroemotional hijackings in response to a
Yeah,
trigger,
and the
every
loop
one of
is
those are an
just fed, and
invitation
the
for me to
giant
feel more and more shame
breeds.
later.
Yeah, yeah.
I get into a feedback loop of guilt and shame now. And what do I begin to believe? Oh, look at me. I'm such an idiot. I'm not enough. Oh, when did you
Yeah.
hear that? Well, first when I was 6. Why are you saying it again? Look at my behavior. Okay, it might have been wrong, but let's work through this because you didn't behave the way you did because you're evil. You behaved because your rational center was offline and you were in a hyper vigilant, emotional, reactive
Okay, I have
state. Your
questions.
brain was just trying to protect you and, and help you to survive.
Because obviously we're human. We've all been in that. I've caught myself in that state more recently as well. My kids tell me it's because I'm premenopause. I don't buy it. There could be some truth to that. Um, but, and I also hear this all the time. So how important is it in that moment when someone is in that state? Okay, let's think about it. Maybe it's us. Forget about it's us. It's somebody we love. We see them in that state and they're hypervigilant, they're freaking out. Da, da, da. How important is the response right there? What is the appropriate response? Is there the appropriate response? Yeah, first, and then vice versa. Because I hear this
From us
also
to
a lot
them.
too. Is like, okay, she's
So
totally
if
freaking out. She's like going crazy. Like, what do I do? And I'm like, okay, she's self protecting in that moment. But also, I've been in that space, and we see it with kids. And I'm just curious, like, how important is other people's response in that moment? What,
Well, the last thing you want to do is, quote, tackle them and force a calming down moment because it's not going to work.
mhm,
But what you can do is generally the reaction is going to be
mhm,
pretty quick.
mm,
Emotions don't generally last more than 60 to 90 seconds within the human system. So,
yeah.
unless they're going to move into physical activity now and they're pulling a knife or they're going to jump the person, then you're going to have to intervene physically.
Totally.
But
But if
sometimes
someone's having a
it's by
panic
the
attack,
time you're like, whoa, what's going on? They're three-quarters done anyway. And so so what you can do is obviously that sympathetic nervous system stimulation is you can bring them to a point now where you can override that and stimulate through the vagus nerve your parasympathetic. I know it sounds all very neuro and I don't want to go too deep that we get stuck here, but extended exhalation breathing is very, very important for parasympathetic nervous system stimulation.
mm.
Also something that's called
Oh, I
convergence
didn't know
therapy,
that.
and I've done this myself on a plane because I hate
Yeah.
flying. It scares the life out of me. And I've been in planes where we're going like this. I mean, I swear to God, we
Hmm.
turned upside down twice and we're in the middle of this crazy storm and I know I'm going to die. And convergence therapy
Hmm.
is this, is if you stare at an object, so I'm going to say my fingers, say if I put them about 2 or 3 feet in front of me, or I look on the wall and I see that switch and I'm going to stare at the switch, or I'm going to stare at my fingers. And then if I look at my fingers, I see the two fingers. If I
Hmm.
look beyond my fingers to look at you, I can see your face now. My fingers are a blur, and it actually looks like there's 4 of them. Then, so if I look at my fingers for 10 seconds, look at you for 10 seconds, look at my fingers, look at you. When I'm going back and
Hmm.
forth, what I'm doing is this bilateral stimulation
Hmm.
in my nervous system. And eventually, what I'm doing is I'm calming down the sympathetic response and I'm activating parasympathetic response. So I've sat on planes with myself with my fingers out there. People must have thought I was nuts,
Hmm. Like, look
but
at
I've
my
actually done
fingers, look
conversion therapy
away.
on a
Yeah.
plane with other people that are in full blown panic attacks and
Yeah. Looking through.
calm them down in 3 or 4. So it's not so much looking
Yeah.
away, it's looking beyond. So when I can see my
Yeah.
fingers, but you're behind them. So I can take the focus off my fingers and look at you. Then I can look at my fingers. So when I look at you, my fingers are kind of blurry in the background. When I look at my fingers, you're blurry in the background. But it's a bilateral stimulation, which is why oftentimes with
Yeah.
neural brain spotting, you put on headphones and the music is going slightly back side to side, and then also with
Hmm.
EMDR, you're crossing back and forth in segments. So you're creating
Right.
this bilateral stimulation, which is almost this form of confusion that,
Yeah.
I'm not getting caught in my right, I'm not
Yeah.
getting caught in my left, I'm going back and forth and back and forth. And it kind of jolts the system right now. So I can't focus left and I can't focus right.
That's
And then
good.
that jolting
What
right now,
about
boom, you
touch,
can
physical
zoom in
touch?
and that's where you can process pain.
Okay.
Touch works very, very well for kinesthetically driven
Yeah.
people. Like,
That's
what if
not
somebody's
the,
experienced sexual abuse and I just want to put my arms around them and hold them like, I'm going to set them off.
mm. I'm
So
thinking
again, if
about in a
touch is going to be
marriage,
involved,
right? Or
always,
like
always, always
a
ask for
parent child
permission, never assume.
relationship or something
But
like
there
that.
is, yeah. Well, you think about there's a particular syndrome And it was first discovered years ago in the Romanian orphanages called marasmus. And marasmus syndrome was, you had these kids that were 12 and 14 in
Mm-hmm.
playpens and diapers, and they were about as developed as a 1 year old or an 8 month old.
Mm-hmm.
And they never developed. And
Mm-hmm.
marasmus was a result of nobody ever held them. So what they were missing was human touch. And
Yes.
so a great deal of our
Yeah.
development is through the idea of touch. That's that greater physical sense of belonging. So there's such a thing as anchoring. So sometimes I could be talking to somebody and they're getting a little bit upset. And I said, do you mind if I just put my arm around you or just touch you for a moment? And if they allow me to,
Mm.
sometimes, or if I know the person, I don't need to ask permission, they're getting upset, I'm going to
Yeah.
touch their shoulder. And what I'm doing is through touch, I'm actually anchoring their nervous system. I'm disrupting the present sympathetic nervous demonstration I'm seeing. And I'm allowing room now. I'm kicking out the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. And I'm allowing room now for them actually to calm
Mm-hmm.
down. And anchoring has a calming effect. And sometimes some will just tap you. That's why, again, it's been blown up
Mm-hmm.
to areas where it's
Mm-hmm.
not as effective as some make it to be. But even tapping can be
I wanted to
very
ask that
effective
because I think about,
because of
often
parasympathetic nervous system stimulation.
I know the trigger is not always about the marriage, but sometimes, a lot of times, it's that person who's closest to you, who you're most intimate with, that is setting off a lot of those triggers. And in that moment, it's like, how do we regulate each other? Can we calm each other down? Can
Hmm.
we invite each other into a healthier place to process what's happening, right? Because it's like a flood of
Yeah.
things coming up from the past. I'm thinking of like years of
Yeah.
resentment and years of pain and years of things all flooding at this intersection. And so it's like, how do we interrupt the pattern together? Obviously, we have to do our own healing, but
Yeah.
we're broken in relationships. So we're also healed in relationship, right? I'm just curious. I wanted to talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
because I've
So,
been doing so much work in,
yeah.
relationships and people reaching out where there's been trust broken, big trust broken, right? Now it's like you're the person who's supposed to love me and you're the one who's like, hey, I want to let you know about a live masterclass I'm hosting soon called Reclaiming the Territory of Your Marriage. I'm going to be sharing the 3 keys to help you rebuild connection with your spouse, restore trust, and lead with greater certainty at home. So click on the link, get registered. This is an exclusive event for a limited time. It is powerful and you do not want to miss it. You're going to walk away with actionable steps and clear strategies that you can apply this week. Click on the link, get registered, and I'll see you on the other side. Like hurting me
Yeah.
through an affair, financial, whatever, right? Like whatever it is. And so now it's like, oh gosh, how do we rebuild trust when we've had
Yeah.
traumatic events?
So I would say 3 things. There's excavation, awareness, and strategy. And what I mean by that, when you think about an excavator, an archaeologist, they're digging deep to uncover something, to discover something.
Yeah.
I would suggest that, hey, listen, if you can do this with the Holy Spirit, it's amazing. If you need a tangible person to do this with you, a coach or therapist, then do so. But I always say that it's hitting that dig deep button that Brene Brown talked about. It's I'm excavating right now to find out what is under the surface. I'm able to bring it to the surface. And now that I have awareness, which is the first trait in emotional intelligence, my awareness now will allow me to create an effective strategy to bring about change.
Yeah.
So I am
What
uncovering
you can't
so
see.
that I
Yeah.
can recover. And you can't recover from what you can't acknowledge, you can't see. So excavation becomes a very important point. What do I mean by that? Is either the couple can do this with a really good therapist as a mediator, or they can do it with each
Mhm.
other if they have enough of a strong relationship and they've really got good solid communication skills. But what excavation is let's get to the root of this. And so here's where pattern identification becomes really important. Is, if I'm, you know I was going to say, if I'm married to you, if I'm married to person A here and person A is setting me off, I want to recognize the pattern. What's going on in me that is set off, and what is the pattern in what they're doing that's
Mhm.
triggering me?
Mhm.
Because there's
Mhm.
patterns on both sides now. Triggers aren't created one sided, they're created in twos. So I want to find out what is she
Mhm.
doing right now that really just lights me up negatively and it scares me or it hurts me. And then when she does this, once I understand that pattern, I can recognize what are the things that are the antecedent cues that cause her to do that. So if I know when she does this, I'm going to do that, then if I can find out what are the things in life that happen or what do I do to cause this?
Hmm.
Because if I see this happening, now I've got the insight to say, I understand the
Hmm.
pattern. When this happens, this is going to happen, and I'm going to feel this. So
Yeah.
when I see that happening, before it even becomes the trigger, I can say, hey,
Yeah.
honey, can I talk to you for a moment? Can I talk
Hmm.
about something you're seeing right now, something that we've talked about, each other's patterns and all that? And, we've talked about this,
Yeah.
and I noticed that when you're here, you're going to go here. And when you go here, it's not your fault, but I'm going to go
Hmm.
here. And if you could have a mediator to help you to break down and recognize the pattern root system, the
Yeah. Right.
identification, that helps a lot because you can cut the root off at the path. You can, excuse me, cut the trigger off at the path before it happens. So I need to do my work to identify, to excavate and be aware of what is it that she does that sets me off. Now, here's the problem. Most people will come to that
Yeah.
awareness. So when I identify what she does to set me off, the goal is now you need to change that. So I just pointed my finger now. So you do this, it sets me off. So stop doing that. It's your
Yeah.
fault. I'm going here. No, I'm going to find out why is that setting me off. I'm going to deal with my own pattern, my own root.
It's
But if
really
we can
good.
do this together, we can
I love
each
what you said
deal with our
about
own
self
patterns.
awareness is the first, would you say it's
Yeah.
the foundation or the first step of emotional intelligence? It, yeah.
Yeah. So there's four steps. There's self-awareness leads to self-management. And then there's others awareness, which leads to others management. Here's what most of us do, and we think this is leadership. We skip
Yeah,
step two and
exactly.
three. I'm going to go for self-awareness
Yeah.
to now managing you.
Yeah.
But I don't even know how to
Yeah.
manage me. And I'm not even aware of you, but I'm going to do others
Yeah.
management. When we go to step 1 to 4, we have
So
what's
good.
called culture
Makes me think
chaos
about
within
discipleship
organizations or
and
within families.
discipline being a fruit of the spirit. It's like self discipline. Do I know how to direct myself before I go disciple somebody else?
Yeah.
I gotta first learn it. Okay, that was good. I love it.
Yeah,
Can we talk
absolutely.
about the stages of trauma? Like when something happens, I'm thinking about a couple of things. We talked about this before we jumped on the call. Is that I certainly come from a generation. I know you do too. Where and you talked about your dad, where all right, things happen, things are said, we don't talk about it. There's really there wasn't a lot, like there wasn't all these podcasts and maybe there was some books, but it was just kind of like suck it up, like go through it, and just and so we develop I mean, I can speak for myself, I
Yeah.
can't speak for you, but you develop sort of, this belief system that's like suck it up, buttercup, just press through, like it's not that big of a deal, it wasn't that big of like you're over it, and obviously you're not because it keeps popping up and da da da. So I guess my question is, how does
Mhm.
someone begin to maybe it's the triggers and the patterns, like how does somebody be able to recognize, like, hey, did I actually go through something traumatic, and what are the stages of trauma and healing? Because I also think about, I know many people who are like, I've had trauma, I've had trauma, I've had trauma, and it's like that's their story and that's where they live. So how do we begin to like go, okay,
Yeah.
recognizing what actually happened is something that does require attention, love, reconciliation, healing.
Yeah.
And what is the process of that and how do we not get stuck in it? I just asked you 3 questions.
Yeah. So if I was to sort of simplify that, and obviously it's much more complex than this, but to keep it simple, is you have an environment, whether it's a person, place, or
That's
whatever,
trauma.
and it does something that impacts me, it hurts me. So what happens is the environment leads to a question. And the questions that I
Mm-hmm.
now subconsciously ask is this: why did they do that to me? What does this mean to me? What does this mean about me? And questions need to be answered. So the minute you hurt me, I actually respond subconsciously within myself with questions. And then I'm going to answer those questions. And the answers to those questions are going to create a narrative. That narrative. So the answer is this: why would you
Yeah.
do this to me?
Yeah.
Well, who wouldn't do this to me? I guess I'm really ugly.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you probably broke
Mm-hmm.
up with me and hurt me. I'm not enough. No wonder, this always happens to me. I could, so I'm asking a question. I'm formulating an answer based upon a narrative. That's creating a conclusion. That narrative and conclusion creates a belief construct now. So you do something, I ask some questions, I tell myself a story. That story then becomes construct in the form of a fixed
Yeah.
belief system.
Yeah.
And that belief system begins to run and gauge my behavior over time. So every time something happens,
Hmm.
I don't need
Hmm.
to ask the question. The questions have already been asked, the narrative's already been formulated. I'm going to go, when
Yeah.
you smile at me the wrong way and I'm hurt, I automatically go right to the construct of my fixed belief because this is what
Yeah.
it means. This is what I believe. Here's how I'm going to behave now. And it happens in microseconds. And so, I always say questions are the answer. I asked a question once when I first started coaching years ago. And I said, what are great answers that you need to become a great coach? And he said, it's got nothing to do with
Yeah.
answers. I said, what do you mean? He said, if you want to be a great coach, then learn to ask
You
great
want a better
questions. I'm
answer?
like,
Ask a better
okay, that
question.
doesn't make sense. They're paying for answers.
Mhm.
They don't want me. That sounds like this client-centered Rogerian approach to therapy. When someone says, I'm hurting right now. So what I hear is you're hurting. Well, yeah, I'm really hurting because my brother hit me. So correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying is your brother hurt you now. And
Yeah.
then after about an hour asking questions, the person goes home and says, I'm amazing. Thank you. You've healed me. You haven't offered anything. You just ask questions, but questions allow the subconscious to get mixing and meshing together. And the system wants to come up with an answer. We have to create the space and dance within the moment to allow that to take place. So in the trauma process and its initiation, there's a scenario, there's a group of questions, there's a narrative, there's a construct or a fixed belief, there's a behavior. And then what we do is we follow that feedback loop constantly in every situation. Just asking some different questions so maybe you can get a different story, maybe one that's really more geared to the truth. Because the conclusion we generally create from trauma is not how bad that person is. We might tell people that, but generally the conclusion is how awful I must be for them to do that. And so what the environment, the questions, the narrative, the fixed belief
Identity.
always creates is a destruction to my value, my worth, and my identity. And so now I live out of that destructive belief system about my worth, value, and identity. I have to ask something that's a little
Hmm.
bit different
That's good.
that now is going to reinstate my value, my worth, and identity. Because trauma impacts identity. And if you have a negative or misaligned identity, it will make you
Say that again.
more susceptible to trauma.
Because if you see,
It goes back to
yeah,
somewhere,
yeah, you get what you
your
expect.
subconscious will not allow you to have what you believe you deserve.
Yeah.
So someone says, but I didn't believe I deserved this. I know, but it happened. But after it
Hmm.
happened 3 or 4 times,
And over
what
time,
construct did you create about
because I'm
yourself through
thinking
this?
about, okay, if somebody's like, okay, I'm catching myself. I've had this conversation myself. I've had this with clients. I've gone through it personally. Where it's like, okay, I'm rewriting the stories often sitting there, Jesus is speaking the truth into me. And then you're like, okay, my body still doesn't believe it yet. Like I'm saying it, I'm rewriting the story, but like it's kind of like,
Yeah.
so is it just repetition then? What do you say to that person that's like, okay, I get it, but I don't believe it yet. So how do I get to the
Well,
believing place? Is
I think repetition plays a huge role, negative or positive. Like when after
Yeah,
3 or 4 years, and I've got this destroyed sense of identity, value, and worth, I just don't believe in myself, and I'm of no good, and I'm making all these poor choices now because
right.
that belief system did not happen really from that event. That event triggered something that you ruminated on and rehearsed and replayed over time. So then you're kind of building on that belief system in every situation now. So repetition, rehearse, replay plays as much of a positive role in healing and development of a new worth, value, and identity as it did repetition, replay, and rehearsing in the negative thing as well. The other thing too is what is it that you're actually going to rehearse, replay, and ruminate on? So for me, at
Right.
least,
Yeah.
I mean, every day, man, I am
Yeah.
declaring the word of God out loud and what God says about me. Like I
You
have to. That's
said,
my
yeah, this
survival. And then my
is
favorite
what your word
saying is this:
says.
"Well, you said, you said." So when I'm facing a
Yeah.
tough time,
Yeah.
Oh man, I put my finger up and I said, "You said this in your word," and I'll quote the verse back to him. And you also said that your word would not return to you void without accomplishing what it set out to accomplish. So you spoke this degree of freedom and life and blessing and favor and healing over me. And so you are either God or you're not. You either are a
Yeah.
liar or you're not. And if your nature is true, then you said this, and that's what I'm standing on. I will spend hours at times
Yeah.
when I'm driving.
Same.
I just, if you pull up beside me in a red light and I got my finger going and I am declaring the word of God over my life, because what I'm doing is I'm rehearsing, replaying, and ruminating on truth, which is eventually going to derail the story. So I think it was
Oh,
Tony
I love
Robbins who
that.
once
So
said,
good.
you got to learn to divorce the story and marry the truth. So I am constantly embracing the truth. What does God say about me? What do people that love me say about me? Why
Yeah.
do I want to listen to what a bad person said about me who did this to me? Why would I empower their words? And there are people, and it's just, I mean, I get this. There are people where their abuser has been gone
Yes.
20
Right.
years, but they're still giving that person power, even though they're gone. They're still living from their words. No, I need to create a new reality for myself. And honestly, if I declare and rehearse it enough, my reticular activating system say, okay, hold on a second, somebody explain this to me, I'm confused. I thought we were bad
Yeah.
and awful and we are of no value, so what is with all this stuff you're saying about yourself right now? And then eventually whatever you
Yes.
practice
That
and you
you'll
feed the
attract,
most
right? That
will
you will
become the thing
attract.
that
And
will
then you get a
become
different
alive in you.
experience. Makes me think of something yesterday. I was
Yeah,
doing a training on our language, like the dialects. We all have a dialect, our family of origin, every home, every family. It's like you walk in, there's a dialect. It makes me think of in Italy. Italy's like the size of Florida. I mean, you go 30 minutes one direction. I mean, shoot, you go house to house and it's like, whoa, are they speaking a different language in here? I'm saying all of that because as I was praying about it and meditating on it, the Lord was bringing up, again, the fact that like when the Israelites left Egypt, they were slaves. They only ever knew slavery. So they had the language of being enslaved, and then when they go, they're free. They're in the wilderness. They actually don't even know
hmm,
survival because before they didn't really have to survive. They were surviving. Someone was feeding them. Someone was telling them where to go, how to do it, whatever. Then they go into the wilderness, but they still have the language of slavery and they still have the language of
yeah,
bondage. So then they still had the culture, which then
yeah,
literally kept them in bondage away from the promised land. And there was a few who developed the language of the
yeah,
future, which was where God was sending them, Caleb and Joshua and that. And now we're like, okay, they got to experience the fruitfulness.
yeah,
So it's almost like, does, as we're going through it, our language has so much power.
yeah,
And I'm hearing you say that, and it's just a reiteration of what I was going through yesterday, is that when we declare a thing, I mean,
yeah,
we've talked about this so many times, that we're making an agreement, we're making a covenant, and we're speaking a new culture into our life, a new reality into our life. And I don't know if I forget,
yeah,
but what we speak, we walk into. What we speak, we end up just running right into again, because as it goes out of our mouth. I mean, the Bible says, you know, death and life are in the
yeah.
power of the tongue, and we will eat the fruit of it. It's like as it comes out, I'm digesting it again.
Well, it comes down to, yeah. Well, this is a whole different podcast, but I'd love some time to talk
Oh,
about the neuroquantum physics behind and the frequency of language. Because when you watch somebody speak or cough, you can see, depending where the light is, the spray that comes off them. So there's something released. Every time we open our mouth,
yeah,
frequency is
yeah,
released. Like there's frequencies all around me right now. There's actually music playing in the air, but I can't hear it
yeah,
because I haven't dialed into the frequency on the radio and turned the volume up. But it doesn't mean the songs aren't playing. So we are constantly releasing frequencies that are either repelling or attracting. They're either shaping atmospheres or allowing the atmospheres to reshape us. So again, there's just when you think about frequency. I mean, I just need to be careful what I say, but even in terms of behavior modification, a sonic bomb, for example, like when the U.S. went into Venezuela, and basically there was
mm,
200 soldiers guarding the president. They just kind of walked in and took the
mhm,
president and left. Like, how did you do that? And there were only a handful of special op
mhm.
guys that did that. What people don't know is they sent in a frequency bomb, And what they did is they shifted the frequency that altered and impacted the brain waves
Mhm.
of the people that were there. And so these people now are shaking and nosebleeds and saliva. And the special op guys just kind of walk by and, hey, how's it going? Well, they're, foaming on the mouth and the ground, grabbed the guy and left. And so frequencies impact the brain, frequency impact
Yeah.
atmosphere. We're so caught in the tangible world around us that we miss the quantum realm
Biblical
and the
warfare.
power of frequencies. And again, that's another thing. But I would say this, that when Job, yeah, when Job said, I think it was chapter
Yeah.
8, you'll declare a thing and it will be established. It's like he knew what he was talking
Yeah.
about. And so we do have the ability to create. The enemy can't create, but we can actually create because we're made in the image of God. So I have creative power to shift or impact an atmosphere simply by what I say. The more and more I rehearse that, the more then my neurological system
Yeah.
gets in
So
line
good.
with the
Love that.
frequency that I'm releasing. And now I become very powerful. And with trauma, for example, we get used to, because the narrative and the constructs that are formed is I'm constantly repeating and rehearsing and declaring these negative things
Yeah.
based on what I believe about me. When I start to shift that, everything begins to shift. So it's
Yeah.
not a case that I'm going to stand in front of the mirror tomorrow morning after breakfast and say, you're just wonderful and I'm healed. But there is a rehearsal, there's a ruminating, there's a constant replaying of that until eventually,
Yeah.
again, your reticular activating system says, this guy keeps saying
And it
this
makes
thing,
me
like, I
think
guess it's
about,
real. It's
yes,
just
God
looking for
creates
what
through
it
the word,
believes
but
to be
also it's
real.
like our cells are responding. But we know this, our cells are changing shape. Like, and I
Yeah.
don't know the science behind this, but I'm interested if you
Yeah.
do, like, as we speak, because there's also, it's going out into the atmosphere, but there's also a resonance inside of our bodies with it when it's our own voice, right? So I don't know if this, I've always been fascinated to study that more, because I'm like, my
Yes.
body's always listening, and it's really like when I'm talking, there's a different level of resonance going through this body, and everything is responding to that at a cellular level, right?
Yeah.
Do you know, like, can you elaborate on that? Or
Yeah. Mhm. Well, it's interesting you mentioned the cellular level. So I'll give you this example, and this is scientifically, empirically proven, is at the
yeah,
bottom of your DNA chain, your double helix, you have your telomeres. And your telomeres are responsible for a lot of things, but let's keep it really simple. They're kind of the fountain of youth, and they shorten over time. And because they shorten, you get old. Well, declarations of frequencies they've discovered now have the power to not necessarily lengthen your telomeres,
wow,
but to drastically slow down the shortening of them. So I can actually prolong the aging process in my body by what I say, because my telomeres are responding to the frequency. Positive frequency being released actually plays a role in,
yeah,
I use this term
so good.
professionally, the retarding of the shortening of your telomeres. So what we say is so powerful, and what we think. And here's an interesting thing, and this goes beyond touch and language, but depending on the theorist you listen to, the average theorist will tell you that the average human uses anywhere between 8 to 9 to
Yeah,
12% of
that's
the
the other
brain's
thing.
capacity. My question always was, where's the other 88%? So I have the potential. So why can't I tap into it? Because I can't be trusted with that just yet. So God's goal is not to remove from me my potential or to hold it back, but to work on me to bring me to a place where I can be trusted with that other 88%. Some would
Yeah, I love
postulate that Einstein used approximately 17% of his brain capacity. So here's an interesting thing. This will really, really mess up
that.
Christians. I just love this is, in the quantum realm, there's no space and time. So I'm not talking about parallel universes, but there's a parallel realm that walks alongside us. So heaven's not out there, heaven's kind of here. And interesting, I said to this guy once, he said, well, okay, I guess I believe there's no space and time. I said, how do you feel about the two crucifixions? He said, what? I said, well, Jesus was crucified twice. He said, what? That's heresy. I said, no, it's biblical. He said, no, he was crucified on Golgotha 2,000 years ago. I said, that was the second crucifixion. He said, what was the first one? I said, well, what do you do with that verse that says in the Bible, Jesus, the Lamb of God, slain before the foundations of the earth?
That's good.
I said, he was already crucified in the heart of God before Adam was born or created. So I said, there's no space and time,
Yes.
which is why
Yeah.
we can pull on our future. Our future is already our past that just hasn't taken place. So I can pull my future into my present. And if you look at Jesus, so he walked through a wall to see his disciples. Yeah, but he was Jesus, but he was a body. And he wanted to prove that. He said, come here, come put your hands in my side. I'm physical. I'm here right now. So could we defy
Yeah.
matter and walk through a wall? Yeah, but we
I
can't be
love
trusted with
I
that kind
love
of
to
power
talk
yet, so
about
we don't.
quantum realms. And
That's a whole quantum
honestly,
realm
I
of
think like
Christianity that people are
we're
like,
not going to
we
do
don't
this.
want to
Maybe
go
we'll do
there,
another podcast.
you
But
know?
for there was a good decade there where I deviated totally away from the church and went deep into that. And and I think it was really good. And I'm so grateful because you realize like now science is just proving what God has said all the time, but we have made it way too flat, way too linear. We're reading the Bible like a textbook
Yeah.
instead of a multi-layered, you know, like just there's so much richness in that. Yeah,
A 10-dimensional book. And when somebody says, well, you want to be careful, that's what the New Agers do and believe and all that. I'm like, okay, so hold on a second. First of all, I'm not scared of them.
yeah,
God's
that's
not
just
scared nor
counterfeit
threatened by them. And
everything.
by
They
the way,
just
what they're
stole it
doing,
all.
that's my birthright they took.
Yeah,
Because we refused out of
yeah,
fear to operate in a realm that we
yeah,
couldn't understand. And so they're like, we'll take it. And they make it
yeah.
work. And so we're like, okay, well, it must be
I
evil because they're
totally
making it work.
agree.
No, that belongs to me.
Totally agree. So
That's
much
my birthright.
powers. The spiritual realm is vast and it's real, and the power is there. And we have to. Um, anyways, other podcast, other conversation. I want to make sure we hit this before we leave because I asked you this earlier, and it might be a basic question, but I think it's still valid. Are there stages of trauma healing? Like if somebody goes through something really traumatic, I think about Christiane getting in this like near death car accident when she was 18, and still she's 22, like
Yeah.
recovering in many ways from certain aspects of that. And I think about things that I went through, like deep, we all did, whether it was abuse, betrayal. What are the stages? Are there stages, or is it just kind of like, well, I mean, obviously there's the initial shock of something happening to you, right? But like,
Well, yeah. So there are stages. I'm careful
yeah,
because what we like to do as humans is we like to create a formula now, and then the formula becomes the answer. When you think about
yeah,
there's the environment, there's the questions, there's the story, there's the fixed belief, then there's behavior. Those same stages that are involved in the
mm,
creation of trauma play a huge role in the creation of healing from trauma. And so this is where excavation and awareness come in, is that okay, so I'm experiencing this trauma and this keeps happening in my life, seems to be a pattern, and it sets me off and I just can't I can't seem to get free from my reaction to this thing here. Okay, so I want to start asking myself some questions. What is it about this that's bothering me right now? How do I feel about me when this happens right now? What is this saying about me? What do I tell myself about me right now? And then I might want to walk through that with God's word beside me or a really strong believing therapist or coach. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to ask the questions and create a new narrative. Because I'm into trauma because the questions I asked and the narrative I created. I'm going to get out of trauma by now the questions I can ask in the formulation by getting to the root now, excavating to create a new narrative or at least a new factual narrative. And then I'm going to have a new belief system and a new behavior. So the answer to the question is short. There are stages to trauma and there are stages getting out of it. And sometimes stages can last a long time. I could be in the narrative story and I've asked the questions, I formed the narrative, I feel really, really good. Then something happens a month later and I go back to my old narrative. Well, why would I do that? What's wrong with me? Nothing. Change is always a challenge till it becomes familiar. So as
so
I'm
I guess what I'm
continually
asking, and
rehearsing my
I'm going to
narrative,
use a
eventually
personal
it's going to
example
take
of
root in
like,
my system.
I think in my life, I didn't really, for a lot of my life, honestly, and then just even recently, didn't allow myself to experience grief. Like I wouldn't allow myself to feel it. I didn't
Mm,
even know it was there. And then I got to a place where I was like numb, like just emotionally numb. Like I couldn't access joy, or like there'd be things that would happen. I'm like, oh, I should be so excited about this. Like, why am I so numb? Or I don't know if this makes sense. And I realized that I had, and I think you and I maybe have had a conversation about this. Maybe we'll have another one offline, but I was like, wow, I don't know if I ever grieved the loss of the child. I think back, I'm going to use a
Yeah.
simple example. I mean, there was years ago, it's not a simple example. It's a heart wrenching example, but there was years ago where I had an abortion, and my mom had an abortion at about the same age that I had an abortion. And it was
Yeah.
something that I swore, like, I would never do that. I would never do that. And in the moment that I chose to have that abortion, it was a long time ago, but I did it out of fear. I did it out of fear of like being rejected. Like it was coerced, it was forced, but I still chose it. And I can actually talk about this now, like, freely. But there was, I don't know, it was like,
Yeah.
I got hit years later with this like overwhelming sense of grief that started to wash over me about the event. Like it was almost like it took me years to realize what happened, if that makes sense. I know you know what I mean. And then like all hell broke loose because then I had
Yeah.
to reconcile everything and then go through what you're talking about. So I guess that's what I'm talking about. I think that, in the
Yeah.
moment it happened, because I've always been in this coaching world. I've always been in the, faith world or church or healing, whether it was, and so it was like, boom, let's get right to the healing. Let's rewrite the story. And then it's almost like there wasn't a moment to just grief, whether it was the
Yeah.
loss of a marriage, the loss of a child, the loss of a home, the loss of businesses that had been built and burned to the ground. I mean, when I was thinking about this the other day, I was like, Lord, you must be setting me up for
Yeah.
something really spectacular because like it's just been like boom, one loss after the other,
Yeah.
which has always been a promotion. It's always been a gain. But can you talk about
Yeah.
that? Just unresolved grief.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we have 5 minutes.
Yeah. Just quickly, because I mean, we could really go do a deep dive into that, but just I would say this, a couple of things.
That's good.
It's very hard to grieve what we continue to self blame for. So if I'm beating myself up for something I've done, then it's really hard to grieve for that,
Mm,
because self blame will not allow you to grieve, because grief leads to healing.
hmm
And grieve, I can't grieve and self blame at the same time. Second of all, for sometimes people don't want to grieve because I've already had too much pain and the grieving stage is going to be painful. So I'm trying to find healing now, not more pain, not recognizing that the pain initially
mm,
you might experience through grieving is what takes you to the place of strength and healing. So
yeah,
sometimes we go into denial. We don't want to grieve because we just don't want to hurt anymore. That's one thing there. And then, second of all, sometimes there's societal pressure. Well, you should just be over this right now. And so society doesn't have a grid for long-term
yeah.
grief. It
Our
might
days,
allow
that's
for
all you
grief,
get.
but it's got a time frame attached to it. Okay, it's been like a week.
Mhm.
And grief, yeah, and grief is a very unique animal. And, again, part of the grieving process is coming to a level of acceptance and understanding and reducing or releasing self-blame. So as I'm working through all those things there, that working through that is actually part of the grieving as well. And then it allows me to go through the various stages of grieving that's going to bring me to a place of healing and acceptance. I'll give an example. As you know, my
Yeah,
daughter passed away a year and a half
yeah.
ago. I still see a grief counselor. Like, I'm pleased to admit that. I'm not ashamed of that. I go every 2 weeks and we just talk about things. And I'll never forget her saying something the first week to
Mm,
me that was very liberating for me.
yeah,
She said, Russ, you're probably never going to get over this, but you will get through it.
yeah, yeah,
And of course, my Christian lens was like, what do you mean? I'm going to be an overcomer. I'm going to
yeah.
get over this. And she said, part of your heart is forever changed, Russ, but you will get through this and you will have joy again and you'll learn to see this differently. And so I have moments where I cry, but I have so many moments where I just smile and
Mm,
say, oh my gosh, you're up there dancing with Jesus. I would give anything to
hmm
see this right now. And I have a beautiful moment thinking about
hmm
my daughter rather than the crying moment that
mm,
was so pervasive in the first few
yeah.
months. Now, have I got over it? No. But am I getting through it? 100%. So sometimes
Mm,
experiencing grief is about reframing and
it's
redefining
really
grief
good.
as well.
I like that. I really like what you said about you can't grieve if you're still blaming yourself because you're in condemnation.
Yeah. And if I don't want to, or the other one, if I don't want to deal
Hmm
with this, then how can I recover from what I refuse to uncover? How can I recover from what I won't see or I won't acknowledge? So I think the reason why David said, even if I go to the depths of hell, make my bed in hell, you're there. I think what he was saying is no matter what pain I go to, you'll be there to walk me through it. I think that was David giving himself permission
Yeah.
to grieve everything he was
So
experiencing,
good.
waiting to be king, but Saul kept trying to
Well,
kill him.
on that note, we're going to end. I know we both have a hard stop here, but talk to us real quick about your book. When's it coming out? Give us the
Yeah.
details.
Thank you. I'm excited. It's called Breaking the Cycles of Trauma. It'll come out the end of July or probably in August. It'll be on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. They're doing a global, like an international marketing push for this. So they told me it'll be in just over 40,000 locations globally. So it'll be pretty easy to access it. One of the things the publisher said that, we really see this as being a bestseller. And what's a little bit different about this book, you have,
Yes.
individuals like Gabor Mate, an amazing, amazing individual, was one of my advisors, one of my mentors, just a brilliant guy on trauma. You have a lot of people that really write and talk about trauma from a science or medical perspective, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
Then you have some pastors that are
Yeah.
trying to write about trauma and know nothing medically or spiritually, or excuse me, science, but they're writing from a biblical perspective. And what the publisher said is, I don't know that anyone's done what you've done. You're doing three. I said, what do you mean? They said, you bring in this expertise of this medical science piece,
Yeah. It's
you're
good.
bringing in the whole biblical component, and you're telling your own trauma story, and you're walking us on a journey through your trauma to healing. So I think it's going to be pretty effective and help a lot of people because of those three components. And that's really my prayer. My desire is I just want to see
So
people's
good.
lives changed,
Well,
and
for those
if
of you
people can be
listening, we're
helped
going to
through the
be
book.
linking up
That's
the
amazing.
link to the book and the website as soon as you get that published. And we'll have Russ's link below so you guys can connect with him and follow him and explore more about his work. So, Russ, I want to thank you for being here. You're awesome. I'm
Yeah,
so glad that we met and we've journeyed together through seasons of joy and seasons of pain and all the things. But
yeah,
I love you and I thank you for being here and sharing your
yeah.
wisdom with us and sharing your wisdom with me. So have a
Love you too.
beautiful day, guys. Thank you for listening. And for those of you who are here, listen, I mean, this was for you,
Thank
but
you.
also the way that you can help us is by sharing this message. If there's somebody that you know that needs to hear this conversation, needs to be in this, take a minute, share this message, comment if you're watching this on YouTube. It helps us get the message out. And as always, if you just take one thing and apply it today, if you take one thing and decide to move on it today in faith, God will meet you where you're at. So I want to encourage you. Don't just listen to this. Don't just take it,
Yeah,
consume it, and throw it out, but let it sit in you, meditate on it, pray over it, put it to good use, and let it get to work in you. And if you want to go further, getting support, check out the links below, connect with us. And we just want to thank you for being here. We'll see you guys next week.